Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Healthier Home, The Inside Story. I'm your host, Dave Jones, and as always, this is Broan-NuTone's podcast. So we're happy to have you here and learn a little bit about indoor air quality and how to have a healthier home. So today, the hot button topic is gas ranges. There's all sorts of news about the consumer protection something, and I can't think of the name of it right now, but they're saying, hey, we might not want to have these anymore, and a lot of us have them and love them, and chefs use them, and they're all over the place, and good, bad, indifferent, wherever you lie on it. This is a really interesting topic, and I think really the key topic that we want to talk about is not necessarily the gas range, but it's a range, and it's emitting stuff, whether it's electric or gas or whatever it is. But anyway, I've got Matt Power, the editor at Green Builder Media, here to talk about this potential ban and gas ranges and what this is all about. So, hey, Matt, welcome to the show.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Dave. Nice to see you. Yeah, no, this is a topic, honestly, over the last few years that I've touched on many times, although my entry into the topic has come from the ventilation side more so. But yeah, we can go all kinds of different directions here to talk about this. And I think I can actually help people who have gas ranges feel a little bit more at ease, like not panic if you've got kids and you're using a gas stove. And you know, we can get into that. Like that's what I'd lead off with saying, don't panic. And there's mechanical stuff out there that can address the problem. I think it's more of a transitional problem. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything about it, but you know, you tell me where you want to start.
Yeah.
We'll go from there.
Why is this a topic? Like, why are we even talking about gas ranges? Why is this a thing that a government agency is looking at? What's going on?
Well, you know, it's something that's been happening in California. Like several cities have jumped on this thing where they're saying, okay, builders, you can't, if you're going to build a new house, you can't put any gas appliances in. So part of it is there's a push towards electrification. And the reason for this is people are looking at fossil fuels and they're trying to phase out. This is the big umbrella picture of this. They're trying to phase out fossil fuels. And there's a good case for it. I mean, if you track whether or not you're a hardcore, you know, climate science believer, it's pretty much irrefutable that climate is changing, right? And everybody's sort of looking around going, what's the low-hanging fruit stuff that we could do now? And phasing out gas is near the top of the list. And honestly, it's probably with where we're going with electric, we can do it quite rapidly. And, you know, one thing I wanted to say about people who have gas ranges, first of all, you don't have to throw out your gas range right now. Consider it a transitional device, right? But I would say one thing you mentioned is, you know, people love gas ranges, and I hear it all the time, and builders are still putting gas ranges into homes. But induction cooking from chefs who use them and know how to use electric induction cooking can be as fine-tuned as gas. Right, so that's one thing a lot of people don't know is they go, well, I could never replace gas because I love to simmer my food and I love all of the little details that you get with gas.
Instant temperature.
Now, induction technology is here. It's been around for decades, although it's gotten a lot better. That I would say there are a couple drawbacks to induction, which is I'd like to see the manufacturers backing them with better warranties. One of the problems with induction is it's hard to repair. Right. So people are complaining like, you know, I put in this expensive induction top and then I can't get it fixed because people don't know how to fix them. So I think induction's not 100% fix, but I would say that's rapidly turning around. And I think you're going to see, especially the bigger brands are on top of this and they're going, wait, we can't have these things unrepairable. So you're going to see better and better products. And they are a performance replacement for gas. So that's one thing I would say, but like to start there in terms of the quality of cooking.
Sure.
So, you know, when people panic, they're like, I love cooking on gas. The quality of cooking can be just as good on induction.
Okay.
So,
fair.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that's one thing. And I think the debate that's going on where somebody said, you know, one of the agencies, you know, spilled some beans about maybe we should look at a gas ban, that sort of thing. You know, that obviously that triggers people because again, and I've heard this term, the nanny state, right? Oh, the nanny state's going to tell us how to live and da-da-da-da-da. The reality is there's already air pollution been dumped into your house every time you cook. And most people don't use range hoods. This is the big problem. And I'm a landlord. I have a small apartment building that I own, and I've had discussions with my tenants, and I said, because they're concerned about, they're all millennials, they're concerned about air quality. And I said, look, you guys, you need to run the range hood whenever you cook. I said, because everybody else in the building's breathing your fumes as well. And if you look at what the big scare was about the gas stoves when they said they're going to ban gas stoves, it's because of the toxins that they give off inside the house. But every kind of cooking gives off toxins. And, one of the ones, we love the smell of baking, right? Most people never turn a range hood on when they're baking in their oven. Well, if you just look online, do some research on what stuff is given off in baking, a lot of it's not very healthy for you, right? So, even though stuff smells good, my rule is if anything smells in the house, it's probably bad for you.
We talk about that too every once in a while around, especially like those, we just got out of the holidays, right? And people light candles, and it's like, it smells good. Well, you're literally breathing in chemical fumes. Or even the cleaning. I have an article on our website called That Lemony Fresh Smell Isn't So Good.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I want my house to smell fresh and my toilet to smell fresh. Well, that fresh smell is just chemicals that you're just...
That's right. With the possible exception of, say, fresh flowers and, stuff like that. I mean, there's probably a handful of things you could say, well, that's actually probably good for you, or to breathe in, spread sage around your house or something.
Right.
So, the reality is that anything that when you cook, you create chemicals that really should be ousted from the house, right? So what gas does is adds a few other things like benzene to the mix, right? So some noxious stuff that's not necessarily in your cooking. So does it raise the level of toxins? Yes. One thing, like I looked at some of the research where they said that because of gas cooking, there was a 12% increase in, childhood asthma and some of this stuff that they said, which the problem is I think that leaves out the bigger issue of cooking at large, right? And I didn't see how they isolated gas stoves in that mix, right? I think if you did the same study of just people who cooked in a house with no range hood, that you would probably have similar results, that you're going to increase the asthma rates in kids because they're breathing in smoke of another type.
It's a argument there.
Yeah.
You're looking at it the wrong direction because you could blame gas when really it might not be that.
It's everything, right? And it's other kinds of cooking as well. So it sort of singled out gas. Okay. And the study, I think, should have been, when you add gas into a house that's already not exhausting. Now, the other thing is with a good range hood, if you're catching 95% of the smoke and toxins from any stove, including a gas range, and expunging it, as you should, from your kitchen, you've basically got rid of that problem.
Right.
So that's my point is the transition, if you're somebody who owns a range hood right now, the easiest thing you could do is, one, turn on your range hood, which you never use. You don't. Right, because we've done the research and when we've seen the studies that say only about 8% of people use their range hoods. Yeah, so when they do, it's usually because there's smoke in the house, right? It's like some extreme event, right? So if you don't have a range hood right now, you could turn on the bath fan and leave it on.
To bring it back to another room.
Bath fans, I know you probably know this. I think they're only about 1/5 of the air movement, right? The CFM of a range hood, so they're nowhere near as efficient. But the low tech fix of somebody right now who doesn't have a range hood, and you're like, oh no, I don't dare to cook, is you turn on your bath fan, you open the window in your kitchen a crack, and you've created an airflow to at least take some portion of that outside of your house.
Sure. Whole home ventilation through exhaust only. Not ideal. The air outside would not be great. It could have pollen in it or whatever, but it should be sealing the house up and being stuck inside with all these fumes and chemicals.
Yep. And one thing, I mentioned you before we got on the air here. Let's touch on COVID for a second.
Sure.
So I had mentioned to you, I wrote an article before the holidays that said this holiday, ventilate like your life depends on it, right? So if you, the research shows that if you increase the air changes per hour in a room by 5, right? So you have like 5 air changes per hour, that you greatly reduce your risk of catching COVID if somebody's in the room. So you're standing around the kitchen with your brothers and sisters and your mother-in-law and whatever. If you don't have ventilation going, especially with this new variant that's out there, they said basically you're almost 100% going to catch it, right? They said this thing's so transmissible. You turn on your range hood, and you've created some airflow through there. You've created a dispersal effect, right? So you've dispersed. You haven't filtered, but you've dispersed. And the two ways that you deal with COVID in the house or in any building is dispersal and filtration. So you've gotten a low-tech, quick fix to make your family and yourself safer. So this ties in with sort of the gas range thing, right? There's a lot of good reasons and I know people don't like the noise, right? But there's a lot of good reasons to use these range hoods and fans for your health.
You could argue then too that we use COVID as an example because it's sort of the most newsworthy and anybody the flu season right now, and Broan-NuTone's up here in Wisconsin. It's cold and dry for 6 months out of the year. It's a long time to have that stuff floating in the air. And I learned recently that it's humidity in the air that those molecules latch on to the virus.
They get on the
droplets.
droplets.
That's how they drop out of the air, and if it's too dry, they just float. Right? And so having exhaust ventilation going all the time, even if you're not cooking, helps draw that out and make sure that you're bringing in fresh air, and getting rid of that stale air.
And I'll throw another thing into the mix: wood smoke. Okay, the more we learn about wood smoke's terrible, right? It's one of the most awful things you can breathe. And even if you got a wood stove, chances are that there's wood smoke escaping into the house. And I live in Maine, so we use wood stoves a lot, right? One of the problems that I've noticed is your chimney. If you open a window like to try to get some air in, you actually can create a loop with your wood stove. Yeah. Your wood stove goes out the chimney, comes all the way back down, and comes in. You fill, and your house, without you even knowing it, has got all this super fine particulate which gets deep in your lungs. So the part of the thing you got to be careful though with range hoods is in any kind of ventilation. If you've got a wood stove, you don't want to create a backdraft, right? Negative pressure where you're pulling that wood stove smoke back into your house. And the same is true with gas stoves, right? So there's always got to be a balance, and you got to have some place for the fresh air to come into the house, right?
Yes.
Now, the ideal way would be like with an energy recovery or heat recovery ventilator, which exchanges the air that you've already conditioned with fresh air from outside and creates a balance inside the house. That's sort of the high-tech way. But short of that, you can open a window, right, in the right spot at the right, place so that it gets an airflow through the house. But you do have to be careful with gas stoves, especially, right, that you're not creating some backdrafting.
Well, right, and you run into that issue with like my home is electric range, but I have gas furnace and gas water heater. Same thing. There's exhaust ports on those. That it's not a sealed system. So if I'm creating too much pull through my range hood, for example, I might be pulling those exhaust fumes off of those burners on my furnace and my water heater into the home. So you make up air is what we call it in the industry, right? It's some way to make up for the air that you're exhausting out, and there's many ways to do it. A lot of modern range hoods, you can get a damper and they put a hole in the side of your house basically, and you filter on it, and it opens up, lets air in while the range is on. And then the hood is on and then closes when it's
well. You make a good point. And in fact, I had a wall hung boiler put in recently, and they were not the contractors were not going to put a fresh air intake. It was in the basement, and I said, well, where? And so is my gas powered hot water heater. And I said, well, where do you think that fresh air in the basement is going to come from? And they said, well, it'll just draw ambient. No, I said it'll draw ambient until it runs out of ambient. And then it'll pull it out of the chimney where the hot water, pipe is going. So I had them put in a dedicated, and this is something for people who are listening to the podcast, is if you have a gas boiler, like a wall-hung like water heater, or you heat your house with a gas boiler, I would make double sure that it has its own dedicated fresh air intake. Right, especially if you have a gas stove upstairs and you're thinking, well, I'll just crank the range hood now. Right. You don't want to create an additional problem. So what you need is to get the building science in your home to be properly done. And contractors don't always do it right, or especially historically, right? I think they're getting a little more savvy, but
they're getting a lot smarter.
Yeah. But in the past, if you have a 10-year-old furnace, even it might not, or a boiler, it may not have any fresh air intake.
Right.
Coming into it.
The key thing to think about as a homeowner is air out, air in, right? It's got to come from somewhere. You'd have a vacuum, and then it's going to come from places you don't want it to.
You don't want it to. Or even, especially, this has happened to me too, is as an apartment owner, if your ventilation for your bathrooms is not all done to, perfectly to code, you can, and you like your traps and all that are not perfect. If there's any gap, like in the traps, it can actually suck the sewer fumes all the way out from the street level. So you can pull sewer fumes into your house. So again, you've got to make sure this is done properly, and there's places for air to come in, fresh
Absolutely.
air.
You're right. I think you could even run into some issues with radon too in my area here, with the high levels of it. Right, I have a mitigation system, but it's sealed, but like there's still cracks in floors and whatever it is that over time, and you're potentially then causing that too. So
pulling it out, if you're overwhelming it, like the pressure, if the pressure from your exhaust is higher than the radon's pressure, then you can create problems.
So there's a lot there to think about in terms of maintaining that balanced system and really thinking that through and providing that fresh air to your home while you're exhausting it out.
So let's say you have a gas range right now, right? Like, so let's say somebody's going, they've read all this news and they're either whatever political side of the fence they can pry this thing from my cold dead hands. And, we know for one thing that behavior is, which we've learned from COVID, is not predictable, right? Is self-interest will not protect people, right? Because a lot of people would like literally rather keep that gas stove, even if they knew they were going to die in a year from it. They would just keep the gas stove, right? So let's assume that you just want to keep the gas stove at all costs. What can you do? So one thing is if you don't have a range hood, we talked about, the quick workaround, turn on the bath fan for now. Now, tell us, like, I'm not that up to date with retrofit on Broan. Like, say they want to retrofit in a range hood system. Like, how doable is that?
Yeah, I did it at my own house here. Yeah. The hardest part is going to be that you've got to cut a hole somewhere in your roof, or in a wall, in the soffit, or right along the edge of your home to get the air out. Right, there's got to be some portal, somewhere to get out, and then the air out. But the retrofit is very easy because the mounting brackets, whatever you've got, if you've got a classic chimney style hood that's mounted to the wall, or you've got an under cabinet, which is what I have, an older home, smaller home. It's just brackets, and more often than not, it just slides right into place as long as you've got that exhaust going out, right? And that's
right.
It was a little bit of work, but my father-in-law generously donated some of his time, and he and I got up on the roof, and we were done in a few hours.
So talk about price point and DIY versus professional.
Yeah. You can do it on the cheap. I mean, a range hood from your local home improvement store. I won't use any names, but you can find Broan-NuTone's products anywhere. But a decent range hood that's not recirculating, that doesn't just recirculate air into the home, that actually exhausts out. Maybe a couple $100 for a really base model. It's going to be loud. The light's going to be just okay, right? But it will do the job. And then you can go anywhere up into the thousands of dollars for a really fancy range hood. Mine automatically turns on based on the heat coming off of my laptop. Right, so you can get some really fancy stuff, which is really nice for the people that either forget to turn it on or don't turn it on. And then, of course, you can hire a contractor, and then depending on your area of the country, it could range, from $1,000 to thousands of dollars, and sort of depending on your scenario, your duct run, what the work they'd have to do. But you could do it DIY. Probably for a couple $100. And
now, one thing I want to add to that, though, is you mentioned, like, if you pay less, you're probably going to get a noisier unit, right? I mean, just because they're easier, probably a little easier to build, a little less the components.
Absolutely right.
So one thing I would say is you need to use this unit, right? Yes. So you kind of, as a buyer, you have to evaluate how important is the noise level to you, right? Because if you're not going to use it, then why put it? You need to use it, right? So. So you may have to spend the extra bucks, if it's difference between $200 and $500 or $600 to get a unit that's half as noisy.
Right.
That might be money well spent.
Absolutely.
Right.
And this is these hoods are built to last, right? It's quality product. Of course, we make them, so I'm gonna tout that, but they're really quality products. I mean, think about the range hoods we have in our homes now. I don't know anybody that's replaced theirs because it broke. Right. Yeah. So you might want to spend that $600,000 because over the life, plan that out over the life of your home. Like that's well worth your well-being, your health. Think of the doctor bills that'll pile up when you're breathing in benzene and NO2, whatever else it is.
Yeah, it really only takes one visit to the doctor to get an asthma treatment to cover that $600 or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. And, you mentioned the thing about heat sensing, and I think this is the key, actually. And especially, I'd say anybody who's out there who rents out or rents a room to somebody or an apartment or whatever, is get some kind of automatic on system because, again, what is it? Trust but verify, or mine is trust but automate. Right,
Yeah.
so put it on. So anytime that stove is on or that oven is on, that fan kicks in. And an electrician can, I know because I've talked to mine about, they can hardwire it for you, right? So that you could actually just have it when you turn on the burner, the fan comes on. It can be done that simply, right? It doesn't have to be and they make particle sensing models now and heat sensing models. So there's different ways that they can sense it. But
your options are almost endless in there. Yeah, and I mean, you talk about sort of renting a room or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Think about so I'm a millennial in spite of the gray hair and the bald head.
Yeah.
Aging in place, like we've got parents and grandparents who don't want to move or whatever it is, and they reaching up over a hot stove to turn on a range hood, or kids. I have a 16-month-old daughter. She grows up, I don't want her reaching over to try to turn that stuff on. So automating these things is a really good idea to just for safety. And then much less for use, right? Grandma probably forgets to turn it on. My daughter's not going to think about it because she doesn't know about indoor air quality. So I got to keep an eye out for me and my own. And automation is a really great way to sort of solve that problem.
Yeah, and I would say also on top of that, like renting a room thing, if you do an Airbnbs, you're renting your place out or something, you're going away. And also, I think that there's a hidden thing that happens when people don't have range hoods, which is that grease and fumes gets into your wallboard. And I have actually done some estimates because I've rented quite a few places in my life. And when you end up repainting and trying to restore like an apartment where, for 3 years, somebody has lived without a range hood, the wallboard is essentially saturated. It's like whether they're smokers or not, and maybe they're meat eaters or whatever, and they cook a lot of hamburgers and stuff. All those smells. Like, have you ever walked into somebody like a friend's house or something? Everybody's house smells different, and the reason isn't their dirty shoes usually, right? It's what they eat, because what you're smelling is all of the stuff that saturated their walls for years, and especially, people are so into resale value, right? Most people will only paint their house interior beige because they're so worried about when they resell, right? So if you're so worried about resale value, what you ought to think about is what stinks in the house, right? And it stinks when you don't use a range hood, your whole house smells. And you're essentially committing yourself. Do you really want to either hire somebody for $4,000 or $5,000, depending on the size of the place, to go through, or do you want to do it yourself at 3 weeks of trying to cut little pieces of trim with your paintbrush? I mean, there's a huge amount of work involved in trying to cover up, and usually it means multiple coats. Like you have to do a sealing coat, like a bins type product or something, then 2 or 3 additional coats, just to try to control the fumes left behind by unventilated cooking.
Sure, that makes sense.
I would
reasons to ventilate, right? Like, I mean, that's two like your health, and then resale value of a home. Even if you're not planning on reselling, just your I don't know, like your comfort level, your well-being in general. Having friends over, like I wouldn't want my friends to come over and say, "Man, like the Joneses' house smells really weird all the time. Like, why is that?" Well, because I wasn't using my range hood. Yeah, I mean, just your quality of life can drastically increase from health and just comfort and well-being, and the feeling of having my friends over, family over, and not worrying about, like, are they going to smell this? Does it matter? Maybe I'm frying fish or something like that. That's a smell I don't want in the house either.
Well, here's something for people who don't own, right? Who aren't worried about resale values. So say you're a renter, right? And I got, so you're cooking and you're not using your range hood, right? And then maybe you're at, like one of my tenants is in her 30s and she's dating and, this kind of thing. When you go on your date, all of your clothes smell like whatever the last thing was you cooked, right? So again, you're deluding yourself. If you think you can cook in a house without ventilation, not only are you breathing all the crap in, but you're saturating every piece of clothing that you own essentially in there. So I mean that's just a more esoteric reason for people at different stages of life. It's always I'm making the case that it's always a good idea to keep fresh air moving through.
Ventilate often. I'm with you on that one. I mean, and I love that you brought up the idea of what if I have a recirculating? The last apartment my wife and I had before we bought our home was just a recirculating galley style kitchen in the corner of the room, right? That everything just sat in there, and we would do the same. We had 2 bathrooms. We turned on both bath fans. I knew those go out because code requires those. It blows my mind that that's required, but it's not required in the dirtiest room in the home, right? Man, it's just crazy.
And I wanted to, for people who don't know anything about range hoods too, right? So I just wanted to touch on a couple basic things about range hoods, right? Because they operate at different speeds, right? So typically, like if you're trying to buy one online or something, they typically start about 300 cubic feet per minute or so, right? So the problem is that the more power they have, the louder they get, right? So one way to keep the noise down is to get the range hood a little closer to the cooktop. Right, so you have. I think generally the rules about 21 inches is isn't it like
the 30 depending on your on the style of hood or whatever.
Right. So and obviously we don't want to bump our head on it and everything else. So you want to get it as high as you can, but at the same time effective. Now one thing I do is I try to cook in the middle, like wherever the burners are that are most centered. Right. So if you're only cooking 1 or 2 things, you put them, where you put your pots makes a big difference of, what percentage of stuff they're grabbing. So, when you're looking at how much power do I really need, I think it's more about using it precisely than having massive, 1200 CFM power, Right.
And it matters how far out your range hood comes over your range top, right? So a really deep range is nice, but when you're cooking on those front burners, like you're saying, your capture efficiency goes way down, even with a high-powered 1200 CFM, right? Like it'd suck your arm right out through the That's still not enough necessarily to cover those front burners where it might go over the lip a bit, which is why those over-the-range microwaves, even if they exhaust, it's better than nothing. But they're at times kind of useless for what we're talking about, which is capturing most of what's coming off, especially if you do those front burners, because those are never covered. And
as a general rule, those microwave recirculate, the research they've done shows when you first get them and they're brand new and the filter's brand new, they might get up to 80% of the particulates, but within like a month, it drops to 20%. So they go from okay performance to terrible performance really quickly. So the idea is because you're relying on filtration. And filtration is not what you want. You want the stuff out of the house, not trying to capture it. You're just not going to get it.
Well, and a filter only captures some of what we're talking about, right? Right. We talked about the chemicals, benzene and carbon dioxide, things like that. That doesn't get captured. Even with a charcoal filter, that's not getting captured. Even a HEPA filter, that's not getting captured because it's gas.
Yeah.
So that's still in your home. So even if you're like, look, I change my filter every day, right? I bought years worth of filters. It's not enough to do what we're talking about, which is getting rid of these gases that are equally as detrimental to your health and to the health of your family and your home.
Yeah, because the particles are too small. And so, the other thing is if you think we got a great filtration system in the house. It's MERV, like you'll hear this term, MERV 13, right? Well, MERV 13 is not high enough. You need a MERV 16, from what I understand, to capture a virion, a virus, essentially. So if you think you're going to filter out COVID, you have to have a MERV 16 or somewhere in that range filter, right? And that means that it actually has to intercept as that virus goes through. Now, the problem, too, the higher your MERV filters, the harder it is on your furnace, right? So you're putting more wear and tear as you try to filter stuff through. That's why I'm a bigger believer in dispersion. I mean, I think it's great to have some filtration, but really, diluting the air is probably a bigger thing than trying to filter. Filter's sort of the last resort, right? Try to catch some of the dust, and we catch some of the other crap that's floating around the air.
In 3 ways. It's exhaust, dilute, and filter. Right? All 3 of those can work in concert together. At the very least, you should be exhausting.
Right.
And then diluting, bring in fresh air, bring in something to disperse that stuff. And then lastly, filter it, like not a problem.
Right.
Pay attention to filter, right? There's a lot out there on the filter world and like ionizing this or not or that. Be very careful about that stuff too before you get into buying an air filter. But at the very least, what we're talking about, you're right, you would need a MERV 16 or higher. And in the context of a range hood, that would make the fan so incredibly loud. It would have to run at full power all the time, because that's a tight filter that you're drawing air through. Your best bet is get an exhausting range hood. If you
get it out,
do it. Yeah, that's your best bet.
Yeah, I think that's true. And one of the things about filters, I guess the reason I still use filters and stuff is basically dust control. It's more about, like, in terms of indoor health. Is it really going to have I don't know whether it really have a significant effect on your breathing, and probably if you're asthmatic, you're probably very sensitive to dust and that sort of thing. So I think, as like you said, as the level 3 defense, it's great to have that level 3, but mostly you've cleared the air. And this is just capturing that leftover stuff from, cat dander and stuff like that.
Yeah. I work
around your house, right?
One of our friends of Broan-NuTone, Corbett Lunsford. Some of you may know him if you've heard of him. He runs an ERV in his house, a balanced ventilation system, and one of his exhaust ports, so drawing air from the home, is right next to the cat litter box. For that very reason, is to capture whatever dust is coming out from the litter and the smell, but that's getting exhausted right out of the house. So it's brilliant to pull it from, like, some place like that most people wouldn't think about. But to your point, right, that's the stuff that's in air that may not have been captured right away, or it is sort of a spot issue that isn't an always-on issue. Pollen might be always happening, and we can capture that and delete that and get rid of it. But, like, somebody bangs some flowers on the table and that goes up, that's a different scenario. The cat digs through the litter box, that's a different scenario.
Yeah. Now, I would say, just to come full circle back to the gas stoves thing, is if you were building new or you're remodeling your kitchen, I would not put a gas stove in now, right? And it's not because they're going to be banned, right? But here's my sort of prediction is that electrification is happening very rapidly in the country. And so there's a lot of naysayers about, well, the grid can't handle it. But what's happening is there's also a lot of management software that's coming out and stuff that manages when loads are used. So they're going to be able to avoid a lot of those big negatives that they're worried about. And, solar is coming, and not so much wind, but solar especially, is coming on so fast. Yep. Like, I think it's a matter of a handful of years. So here's the thing. When gas is phased out, like, say, some cities are not, like, especially in California, I think there's 3 or 4 cities that are phasing out and saying you can't put in gas appliances. The problem is you start taking away part of the consumer or the client base of these gas companies, and they start to unravel because, they need a certain critical mass because it's expensive to maintain a gas network of pipes, and they need to be replaced. And so you could have, and I'm not saying necessarily, but you could have a fairly rapid collapse of the natural gas network in the country as demand drops even a small increment, right? So it doesn't have to mean everybody gave up their gas, but say demand went down 15%. Like, would that be, we don't really know what the exact, but my guess is it doesn't take a 50% decline to trigger big problems for that utility.
Oh, of course.
So,
that makes sense.
I just say in terms of resilience, my feeling would be don't throw out your gas stove now. Keep it for, until you're ready to remodel and whatever. And hopefully they'll have a take back. Some big companies will have take back systems where they take that gas stove and maybe they can even convert it, right? Maybe they can convert it to an induction. They just slap a new top on it or whatever, so it doesn't go into the landfill, right? Yep. But you don't need to panic. You need to focus on your ventilation. But if you're building new, look at induction tops. I would also say, though, if you have a nice quality electric coil top, you also don't need to throw that out now, right? Because, I actually did an article on this recently, is you can get a lot of years out of that coil top. You can replace those elements. So I think part of, if we step back from this gas frantic thing, is everybody needs to take a breath and slow down a little bit, right? The technology we have has been around for decades. It works good. What we need to do is just use it smarter, like the gas stoves. We need to start, and we haven't been smart about cooking in general in the house, right? We just haven't paid attention to the health risks. And maybe the good thing that will come out of this is people start looking at it a little more seriously. Yeah.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Well, hey, I think we're hard up against our time here that I wanted to run for this episode. This was really great. I really appreciate your time on this and insights into all of this. for those of you listening, go check out Green Builder Media. Check out all of Matt's stuff and all the stuff they have there on how to build greener, how to build smarter, how to build better. It's not just about green technology. It's building smarter and healthier, right? I think there's a big misnomer about green and health that they aren't the same. There are some correlations, but they aren't the same. So build healthy, build smart, and you guys do an awesome job covering that and all things building related. So well done. Bravo to you guys. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much for being on our podcast. And from those of us at Broan-NuTone, you stay well.